Immediately after the assassination of the Emperor Domitian, the Senate declared a man named Marcus Nerva as emperor. He was old, childless, unknown, and unpopular. The thought within the Senate was that anyone would be better than the previous emperor. However, Domitian had been popular with both the Roman people and the Roman army. Nerva, who was not prepared to be the emperor, would have a challenging time on the throne. Nerva was never meant to be the emperor. He had always operated in the shadow of other imperial regimes, gaining positions of power, but never any real fame or prominence. Once he became the emperor, all bets were off. Nerva restored all the property that Domitian had confiscated from senators, ended the treason trials, and promised a return of liberty. He gave gifts and lowered taxes on the common people to gain their support. However, his cut and spend policies damaged the economy, causing financial instability and threatening the imperial government with bankruptcy. Nerva also lacked the support of the military. Many military officers were angry that Nerva was granting mercy to Domitian's assassins. In 97, the Praetorian Guard besieged Nerva in his imperial palace, and forced him to deliver the wanted individuals for trial. Nerva's authority never recovered from this incident, and he knew he needed a popular heir to remain on the throne. For this, he picked a man named Marcus Ulpius Traianus, better known to history as Trajan. Nerva was dead just a few months later in the beginning of the year 98. Trajan was born Marcus Ulpius Traianus on the 18th of September, 53. He was the first Roman emperor to be born outside of Italy. He was born in Hispania. His rise to the highest office represented the increasingly diverse nature of Roman identity. Trajan was a prominent military officer before becoming emperor. He was popular with the people and the army and was serving as the governor of Lower Germany when Nerva declared him his heir. Trajan remained in Germany for at least a year with his legions despite a period of peace before ceremonially entering Rome in early 99. In many ways, Trajan mimicked the great emperor Augustus. He gave gifts to the people and sponsored public games. However, he only gave half of what most emperors would normally give away to the military, something he could get away with as the most popular general. He also followed Augustus and kept up a facade of power sharing with the Senate, an agreement they eagerly accepted. In reality, Trajan kept much of the same authority that Domitian had held, making him just as much of an autocrat and a dictator. But he was nicer and more subtle about using this authority, preserving Nerva's policies of reconciliation and compensation for persecuted senators. Thus, although he was an autocrat, he was no tyrant. Trajan had always believed that Rome could use more military expansion, and as emperor he had the power to fulfill these ambitions. He launched 2 wars against the king of Dacia, the Cebalus, who had once extracted tribute from Domitian. After the end of both wars, the Dacian capital was burned, the Cebalus was dead, and Dacia was made into a Roman province. Its rich gold and silver mines would supply Rome with valuable metal for minting coins. In order to supply his army in Dacia, Trajan ordered the construction of the largest and longest bridge that humans had ever constructed to cross the Danube River. This bridge, constructed of solid stone and wood and meant to last decades, connected Dacia to the rest of Rome. Trajan's building projects were spectacular. With the riches from Dacia, he financed the construction of a massive complex of buildings in Rome and around the empire. He built a forum, a market, and a triumphal column, all of which are still visible in Rome today. He built roads connecting the provinces of the empire, including crucial highways in Italy. He commissioned urbanization projects in the underdeveloped provinces of Thrace and Dacia, building new cities and bringing Roman colonists to settle the land. Also worth mention were the enormous series of gladiatorial games Trajan sponsored in the Colosseum. Constant games running for 3 months resulted in the deaths of over 10,000 people, mostly servants and slaves, and the attraction of over 5 million spectators. Trajan also sponsored a new welfare program called the Alimenta, which was designed to give charity to poor orphans and children throughout Italy. Trajan's last great project was the conquest of Parthia. He was unsatisfied with the status quo in the Middle East, and he believed Rome had the strength to destroy Parthia. In 113, he assembled a great army in Syria, took advantage of the fact that Parthia was undergoing a civil war, and invaded. The war seemed simple at first. Trajan met little to no resistance as he marched into Mesopotamia. But the Parthians were avoiding a direct battle and forcing him to besiege strong cities and forts, slowing him down. Eventually, his army's supply lines became overextended. Trajan succeeded in conquering Mesopotamia, but the interior of Persia was still impenetrable, and he was no closer to his ultimate goal. Fortresses in Mesopotamia were still resisting when he dropped dead in late 117, perhaps from the strength of exertion and the hot sun of the desert. Shortly after, the campaign was called off, and Roman forces retreated to Syria. Succeeding Trajan was his hand-picked heir, Hadrian, whom he declared in his will. Hadrian was born Publius Aelius Hadrianus on the 24th of January, 76. He married into Trajan's family at an early age, and Trajan identified him as having the characteristics of a good public servant, endorsing Hadrian and helping him win political offices. He was an honest official and a charismatic figure in the public eye. Upon ascending to the throne, Hadrian was acclaimed by the soldiers as Augustus. He decided not to renew the assault on Parthia and instead negotiated a peace settlement. A stipulation of the status quo antebellum peace was that Rome would withdraw from Armenia and leave it as a neutral state, a move which was incredibly unpopular and would have earned any other emperor a quick death. Hadrian's primary concern was the consolidation and stability of the Roman Empire, while publicly honoring the legacy of Trajan and preserving his lucrative conquest of Dacia. He privately deplored wastes of resources like attempting to conquer Germania or Persia. He believed Rome had already reached its natural carrying capacity, and that if it were to survive, it would have to hold its current frontiers, assure border security, and benefit from both internal and external trade. Everything he did was in accordance with this pursuit of stability and prosperity. Hadrian was a prolific traveler. He stayed in Rome only for brief periods during his reign, preferring to travel around the provinces, oversee provincial administration, and commission building projects all around the empire. Most of his reign, in fact, was spent away from Rome. From 118 to 133, he visited every province in the empire, from Gaul to Britain to Spain to Egypt to Judea to Greece. Everywhere he went, he eliminated corruption, improved local infrastructure, and encouraged the flourishing of culture. His most famous legacy, Hadrian's Wall, was also commissioned in Britain for defensive purposes. It served as a trade barrier to regulate the movement of goods and people. He also improved the Limes Germanicus, the frontier defenses of Germany, for similar purposes. His favorite province of all was Greece, which he visited multiple times. Hadrian was in every way a cultural exponent of Greece. He was the first emperor to have a Greek-style beard, contrary to Roman preference for clean-shaven faces. Pretty much every emperor before him had had a clean-shaven face. Well, it's aside from Nero's neck beard, but we don't talk about that. I mean, look at that thing. What the hell? He sponsored poetry contests, promoted the spread of Greek culture, and personally participated in Greek religious rites. And he considered himself a polymath, dabbling in literature, poetry, mathematics, and architecture. He was an amateur in each of these fields, but there is no denying that he was quite the genius. He was also the lover of a teenage boy, which was a common practice in Greece. The boy's name was Antinous, and Hadrian traveled with him across the Mediterranean. When Antinous mysteriously died in Egypt, perhaps by drowning, Hadrian mourned and founded a city, Antinopolis, in his honor. Hadrian's most infamous deed came in 133, when he was forced to deal with yet another Jewish revolt in Judea. Roman mismanagement had again provoked the Jews to violent resistance, and Hadrian decided the cycle had to end. His solution was to practically eliminate the Jewish population in the region, killing tens of thousands of Jews, forcing others to immigrate, and renaming Jerusalem, making it a Roman city. This was essentially small-scale genocide. In the last years of his reign, Hadrian rested in Italy, taking up residence in his villa built a couple dozen miles away from Rome. It is a massive complex of gardens, residential buildings, and recreational areas, known as Hadrian's Villa, and it still stands today. It was there that he died in 138. He was 62 years old and had ruled Rome for 20 years. Antoninus Pius was born Titus Aurelius Fulvus Boionas Arius Antoninus on the 19th of September, 86. God, that was a long name. He married Hadrian's niece, putting him in close association with the imperial family. He was a consul under Hadrian and was a trusted advisor during his reign. On his deathbed, Hadrian declared Antoninus his son and heir. Technically, Antoninus wasn't meant to be the actual emperor. Hadrian really had his eyes on a younger man named Marcus Aurelius. However, Marcus was too young and inexperienced by the time Hadrian died. So he made Antoninus the emperor as an interregnum, and intended for him to die within decades so Marcus could take over. After all, Antoninus was already 50 years old, and he couldn't be expected to live too much longer, right? But Antoninus didn't die. In fact, he lived to an older age than Hadrian himself, and spent more time on the throne than any emperor since Augustus. Not to be mean, but if we're honest, Antoninus didn't do a whole lot during his reign. Unlike the prolific wanderer Hadrian, a man of travels and high culture and action, Antoninus lived a very sedentary life. He never once left Italy during his entire reign, and rarely left Rome itself for anything. Most of his time was spent in his palace on the Palatine Hill, or in the imperial box, addressing the people in the Colosseum. For the purposes of Roman history, Antoninus as an individual was pretty inconsequential. However, it is undeniable that Antoninus oversaw the greatest period of prosperity in Roman history, and perhaps in human history up to that point. During his reign, everything that the previous emperors had built toward came to a high point, an apex. The economy was flourishing, political liberty was secured, civil wars and sedition were unheard of, peace prevailed on the frontiers, culture was blossoming, the common people were well fed and entertained by public shows, the nobles were enjoying great wealth, and the quality of life was the highest it had ever been in human history, in any place. This was the top. This was the best it was ever going to get. And Antoninus, simply because he managed to not fuck it up, deserves our praise. Antoninus didn't really do nothing, though. He was everything a good but unremarkable emperor was supposed to do. Not piss anyone off, spend just the right amount and tax just the right amount, keep good relations with the people, the army, and the Senate, and ensure that everything was working fine. He also passed some notable legislation protecting the rights of slaves and increasing the likelihood for slaves to be freed. Rome had not had an influx of new slaves for a while, and Antoninus sought to gradually move Rome away from a reliance on slavery, while assuring the rights of those who remained slaves. For this, he was very progressive. Antoninus Pius died in 161 CE. He was 74 years old and had ruled Rome for 22 years. Even as he passed on, trouble was brewing on the horizon for Rome. Marcus Aurelius was born Marcus Annius Verus on the 26th of April, 121. He was a noble and already seemed a very promising choice to lead Rome when Hadrian died in 138. As mentioned, though, he was too young, and he waited his turn through the long reign of Antoninus Pius, serving in public office. As was the custom for future heirs to the throne, he was allowed to serve before reaching the legal age limit for most offices. When Antoninus Pius finally died in 161, Marcus was already 40 years old. Hadrian had also adopted another son, Lucius Verus, and the Senate confirmed both of them as co-emperors. This was the first time that two recognized emperors had shared authority over the empire. Although they were technically co-emperors, Marcus was older and was the senior partner. Trouble came right away. Relations with the king of Parthia, Vologases, had been tenuous for several years, and the Parthians invaded Armenia shortly after Antoninus' death. Threats of war also appeared in Britain and Germany. Marcus was never given any military experience, and he was unprepared to be a military emperor. Nonetheless, he prepared himself to take on these responsibilities. He educated himself in military strategy and history. He took care of business close to home, removing corrupt or disloyal officials and replacing them with trustworthy ones. He continued to learn from his tutor, Marcus Cornelius Fronto, about speeches and oratory. During this time, he was well liked, always in the public eye, enjoying learning and philosophy, and he was happy. While Marcus was dealing with affairs in Rome, his co-emperor Lucius Verus was making a mess in the east against the Parthians. Instead of leading his army, he stayed in the cities and just went to parties, allowing the campaign to come to a stalemate. Although the war was eventually won, it was mostly because of Lucius's subordinates, such as Avidius Cassius, who planned the strategies, fought the battles, and led the armies. Marcus had his own problem, one he would have for the rest of his life. In 166, a Germanic tribe known as the Marcomanni began attacking the Roman border and threatening Italy. Other tribes, including the Shtey, attacked simultaneously and even broke through the frontier for the first time in decades, raiding Roman towns. Unfortunately, the Marcomanni did not fight open battles and allow the Romans to bring a quick end to the war. They tested Roman patience by avoiding confrontation and keeping the war going as long as possible, with the hope that they could get a good peace deal. They were also allied with two other groups, the Quadi and the Sarmatians, making them more formidable. Their raids were devastating Roman land. This war came with another issue. The empire was experiencing a plague. It was first spread to Rome from the east, where Roman soldiers contracted it in campaigns against Persia. Modern historians believe it was smallpox. At the time, it was called the Antonine Plague, and over the course of 2 decades, it killed millions of people within the Roman Empire. One of the plague's victims just happened to be the emperor, Lucius Verus, who died in 169 of the disease. He didn't really do much though, so no one really cared. Marcus, for his part, fought his war with the Germans well. Despite disliking military life, he embraced it and learned how to live like a soldier. While on the frontier, he also began work on perhaps his greatest legacy, his philosophical treatise called Meditations, which remains today one of the best-selling books on how to live and how to think. Marcus Aurelius was trying to follow Plato's model of the philosopher king. Plato conceived the philosopher king as the deep thinker and the wise leader who also applies his thinking in the practice of ruling his kingdom. Marcus executed his duties as an emperor remarkably well, keeping up with all the matters of administration, even while busy with war. By the year 180, he was close to ending the war with the Germans. But that year, Marcus Aurelius died on the frontier. He was 58 years old and had ruled Rome for 18 years. With him, the last of the 5 good emperors, an era of Roman history came to an end. For almost a century, the emperors of Rome had been chosen by adoption. The emperors had chosen the best man to succeed them. This had allowed a remarkable series of men to rule over the empire. This dynasty of adoption, also known as the Nervan Antonine dynasty, had given Rome an old man, a great conqueror, a great consolidator, a steward of prosperity, and a philosopher king. During this period, Rome rose to its highest peak, experiencing several decades of peace and stability. But by the end, things were already becoming more uncertain and unstable.